Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the shadowed halls of Lothric and the ashen roads beyond, uncovering the hidden lives of the strangers who share that world with you. These are the NPCs, who speak in riddles, die without warning, and carry secrets most players never discover. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. Henri's gender is always the opposite of yours, and there's a dark reason why. When you first meet Henri of Astra near the halfway fortress bonfire on the Road of Sacrifices, you may have noticed something quietly strange. If your character is male, Henri appears as a woman. If your character is female, Henri appears as a man. This isn't a coincidence or a quirky design choice. It's an intentional piece of architecture built around one of the most unsettling secrets in the entire game. The reason Henri always presents as the opposite gender is because the game is designed from the start with the assumption that the two of you will one day be married. This hidden marriage ceremony is a key step in unlocking the usurpation of fire ending, considered by many to be the true or canonical conclusion to the story. The wedding, as it turns out, involves plunging a sword through your betrothed's face, which is the sort of ceremony only Lothric could produce. The game quietly pairs you with Henri from your very first meeting, threading the logic of this dark union through every interaction you have together. Henri was already hollow when you first met. Most players assume Henri begins to hollow after being separated from Horace the Hushed, their silent travelling companion. The grief and isolation seem like the obvious cause, but the truth is darker and more precise than that. Players who have examined Henri's model through save editors and character manipulation tools have found that Henri's face beneath the helmet is already the sunken, desiccated face of a hollow, present from the very first meeting on the Road of Sacrifices. Uria of Londra later confirms this, referring to Henri as a hollow without any apparent surprise, and the Fextra Life wiki notes that this hollowing was there from the start of your acquaintance. Based on what we know, the cheerful, determined knight you encounter near the halfway fortress bonfire has already lost the inner battle that most undead dread most, and they've been fighting on in spite of it, choosing purpose over despair. It makes every conversation you have with them carry a different kind of weight. The Londor Pilgrim, hidden inside Yorshka's church. Inside the church of Yorshka in Irithel of the Boreal Valley, Henri eventually rests before the fight with Pontiff Sullivan. If you speak to Henri there and exhaust their dialogue, you might think the scene is peaceful, a moment of quiet before a difficult boss. But in the corner of that church, disguised among a cluster of statues, stands a pilgrim of Londor. This figure is not decorative. She is an assassin sent by Uria to kill Henri, so that Henri's body can be transported to the Darkmoon tomb and used in the ritual marriage ceremony. If you walk up to the statues and attack them, one will react, revealing the pilgrim and allowing you to kill her. Doing so saves Henri's life and allows them to survive to place a summon sign outside the Anor Londo Cathedral, where they'll ask for your help killing Aldrich. Most players walk right past the statues without a second thought. Horace the Hushed was never truly silent. His name tells the story. Horace is a big, quiet knight who travels with Henri and barely says a word. Most players absorb him as a background character, loyal muscle, a quiet friend. But his name carries a specific and haunting weight. He is described in every interaction as simply silent, not just reserved, but entirely without speech. responding to you only with grunts. The game never explains why. Some in the lore community have connected the Blue Sentinel's Covenant's language around tongues. The Covenant item refers to those who hunt dark spirits as taking their names in ancient accord, to the possibility that Horus lost his voice as a cost of that service. Others have noted that Horus's silence could simply be one more wound from whatever happened to him and Henri before you ever met them, since they are both confirmed survivors of Aldrich's captivity as children. The name Hushed could imply something taken or something never regained. The game leaves it unspoken, which feels almost deliberate. When you finally find Horus in the cave beneath the smouldering lake, he is fully hollowed, and he attacks you on sight, swinging his halberd with the mindless aggression of someone who has lost everything that once made him himself. All that remains is the armor, the weapon, and the violence. Henri's sword was never really Henri's. When the Henri questline ends in the marriage path, you receive Henri's straight sword, or you find it resting near the altar in the Dark Moon tomb after the ritual. Reading the item description reveals something melancholy that most players skip past. The sword did not originally belong to Henri. It is simply a weapon they picked up along the way and chose to carry. The description also notes that the land of Astora, the place Henri claims as their homeland, is a ruined country that barely exists anymore. Further reading of the elite knight armor set that Henri wears confirms something even more poignant. Henri does not truly know Astora. They were simply drawn to the idea of it, to the legend of what Astora once represented: honor, knighthood, a reason to keep moving. Henri of Astora is, in a very quiet and deliberate way, a person built from borrowed identities, carrying a borrowed sword, in service of a borrowed dream. Sigurd and Sigmire, one voice, two lives. Sigurd of Katarina, the cheerful, soup-making knight in the distinctive onion-shaped armor, was voiced by Miles Richardson in Dark Souls 3. But Richardson also voiced Sigmire of Katarina in the original Dark Souls, and the connection between the two characters runs deeper than shared casting. Both characters are found sitting down in moments of puzzlement. Both say the exact same phrase upon first meeting. So here I sit, quite in a pickle, and both are connected to a gentle, wandering quest line that ends in melancholy sacrifice. Sigurd is widely understood to be either a descendant or a spiritual reincarnation of Sigmire, continuing the same cycle of cheerful determination through a world that endlessly repeats itself. His name itself is derived from Germanic words meaning victory guardian, a quiet echo of the legendary dragon slayer Siegfried from Norse myth. He carries all of that weight in a round metal suit that looks like an onion. The toast that actually heals you. When you find Sigurd of Katarina resting in the kitchen of Irithil of the Boreal Valley, through the small sewer passage near the distant manor bonfire, he invites you to sit with him and share a bowl of Esther soup. It's one of the warmest moments in the entire game. A tired night, a pot of soup, and a brief pause from the relentless pressure of Lothric. But there's a hidden layer to this scene that most players never notice. When Sigurd gives you the Sigbro item during the toast, a special brew he carries that restores HP and boosts frost resistance, your own health actually regenerates during the conversation. The act of simply talking to him, of receiving his toast and his warmth, quietly heals you. It's a mechanical expression of something the game almost never says out loud. That rest and companionship have real value in this world, even for the undead. Sigurd can silently save Greirat's life, Greirat of the Undead Settlement is one of the game's most endearing NPCs. A thief with a kind heart, who goes out on scavenging missions to bring back goods for the player. His second outing takes him to Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, where he will die unless someone intervenes. Most players who know about this send Patches the Merchant to rescue him. But if you've kept Sigurd's questline alive, if you've given him back his armor and he's resting in that Irithyll kitchen, Sigurd will quietly and automatically rescue Greirat from danger without you ever having to ask. This interaction happens entirely in the background. You won't see it play out. You won't receive a notification. You'll simply find that Greirat came home safely, and the only reason is that a round man in onion armor decided to look out for someone along the way. It's one of the most generous secret interactions in the entire game. Patches has been tricking you across every Miyazaki game. Unbreakable Patches appears in Dark Souls 3 at the Cathedral of the Deep, initially disguised as Sigurd of Katarina, where he tricks you into crossing a narrow bridge before lowering it and sending you plummeting to a pit below. He's done some version of this in every game Hidetaka Miyazaki has directed. In Demon Souls, he was Patches the Hyena. In Bloodborne, he was Patches the Spider. In Elden Ring, a version of him appears as Patches the Untethered. His full title in Dark Souls 3, Unbreakable Patches, is itself a nod to his repeated, indestructible survival across every world and every cycle. He is one of the few figures in the entire Soulsborne universe who persist not through power or divine lineage, but through pure, relentless self-interest. His very existence suggests that in a cosmos where gods rise and fall and fire endlessly cycles, the only constant is a man with no loyalties and an eye for shiny things. Patches sells exactly 2 shotels, a hidden reference. Among the various items that Patches sells as a merchant in Firelink Shrine, 2 items stand out as oddly specific. He sells exactly 2 shotels and 1 parrying dagger. The numbers matter. In the original Dark Souls, a character named Knight Lautrec of Karim, a scheming, treacherous NPC with a grudge and a tendency to make your life more difficult, wielded those exact same weapons in exactly those same quantities. Lautrec used 2 shotels and a parrying dagger. The fandom wiki notes that this may be a reference to Lautrec, a character that Patches crossed paths with in the original Dark Souls. And reading between the lines, one coherent interpretation is that Patches collected or appropriated those weapons from that earlier encounter. Whether that's what the developers intended or simply a satisfying coincidence, he carries the precise inventory of his most memorable rival. His shop is a trophy case, if you know what you're looking for. Patches will call you a different name based on your character. When Patches lowers the bridge and sends you tumbling in the Cathedral of the Deep, he shouts an insult at the falling player before you disappear from sight. What most players don't realize is that the specific insult changes depending on the gender and apparent class of your character. If you're playing a female character, he calls you an insatiable wench. If you're playing a male character, he calls you a greedy guts. If you're dressed like a cleric, he has his own special line prepared for that too. It's a small detail, but it speaks to the depth of Patch's characterization. He isn't just a generic trickster. He's observant, he adapts, and his contempt is tailored specifically to whoever he's speaking to. He's looked you up and down, taken your measure, and already decided exactly what kind of mark you are before he's even pulled the lever. The nestling crow's name is secretly 2 names. The strange crow that nests atop the roof of Firelink Shrine. The one you can trade items with by dropping them into its nest. Has an official in-game name listed in the credits, Nestling. But most players know it as picklepee, pumper-rum, which are the sounds it chants when it accepts a trade. Here's what almost no one knows. Those two phrases come from a real poem. The source is The Ceremonial Band, a children's poem by English author James Reeves. In that poem, picklepee is the onomatopoeic sound of a fife, a type of small marching flute, and pumper-rum is the sound of a drum. The crow isn't actually telling you its name when it chants. It's voicing the sounds of instruments. This has led some players to theorize that the logic behind the items it accepts is connected to that imagery. Things that produce sound have holes or resemble instruments in some way. Whether or not that theory fully holds, the crow borrowed its vocabulary from a children's marching band poem and has been chanting those two lines at the sky of Lothric ever since. Trading Solaire's armor from a crow. Through a series of trades with the nestling crow on the roof of Firelink Shrine, you can obtain the complete armor set of Solaire of Astera, the beloved sun-praising warrior from the original Dark Souls. Solaire himself does not appear in Dark Souls 3, but his armor and shield can be unlocked through specific item trades. A lightning urn for the helmet, a homeward bone for the bracelets, a seed of a giant tree for the leggings, and a rare item called Sigbrow for the chestplate. The Sigbrow trade is the hardest one, since Sigbrow comes from Sigward's questline. The fact that Solaire's armor is hidden behind this system, that you have to find a crow on a roof and know exactly what to offer, feels fitting for a character who was never quite where you expected him to be, and who always rewarded those who went looking. The Firekeeper's hidden trauma. The Firekeeper of Firelink Shrine is one of the most serene figures in the game. Blindfolded, soft-voiced, endlessly patient. She levels you up. She speaks in careful, considered sentences, and she seems to exist in a state of gentle acceptance of the world's suffering. But there is something beneath that serenity that the game surfaces only through specific item descriptions. The Firekeeper set, found in the tower behind Firelink Shrine, if you explore carefully, describes the Firekeepers as women who are trained from birth to channel the flame and to suppress their own selves entirely in service of that duty. The blindfold, according to the law, is not decorative. It prevents the Firekeeper from seeing the world clearly, keeping her focused entirely on the flame. She is not at peace with the world. She's been taught not to see it. There's a difference, and it's one the game trusts you to notice. The eyes the Firekeeper was never meant to have. In the Untended Graves, a secret area unlocked late in the game through the Consumed King's Garden, there exists a dark mirror of Firelink Shrine, consumed by shadow and silence. Deep within that cold darkness, in a chest near the altar, rest the eyes of a Firekeeper. The description states that these eyes were taken from a Firekeeper and sealed away, because they grant the ability to see a world without fire, a world beyond the Age of Flame entirely. If you find these eyes and give them to your Firekeeper, she becomes deeply unsettled. She asks questions she's never asked before. She speaks about things she's never been allowed to imagine. And then, when you reach the final boss and the moment of choice arrives, she can be summoned to help you choose an entirely different ending. One where the fire is allowed to fade and a new age begins. The eyes didn't just give her vision, they gave her doubt. Greirat's undying debt to a dead woman. Before Greirat of the Undead Settlement asks for anything from you, he asks you for one thing: a bone. He wants you to find Loretta's bone, which rests in the Undead Settlement hanging from the great burning tree that the hollowed crowd worships. Loretta was the woman Greirat loved. or at least the woman he cared for deeply enough to carry her memory as the first and most important item on his agenda. He never explains the full story. He doesn't tell you how Loretta died, or what their relationship was, or why he's carrying her ring. He just asks you to bring him proof that she's been properly laid to rest. When you return the bone to him, he gives you her ring and tells you to keep it. Then he curls up quietly for a while, and when he's ready, he goes back to being the cheerful, dangerous little thief who runs head first into the most hostile cities in Lothric. The grief is there. He just keeps moving. Greirat can only be saved from his second mission by one of two people. Greirat's second scavenging run takes him into Irithel of the Boreal Valley, and he will die there unless specific conditions are met before he goes. Either Patches the Merchant must be present in Firelink Shrine and informed of the danger in time to go save him, or Sigurd of Katarina must be present in the Irithel kitchen, having completed enough of his quest line to be on hand when Greirat arrives. If neither of these conditions is met, Greirat doesn't come back, and if you trigger Irithel Dungeon before Sigurd has been settled in that kitchen, Sigurd moves on and can no longer help. The window is precise, the conditions are never explained, and countless players have lost Greirat to this invisible timeline without ever understanding why. He goes out, confident and cheerful, into a city that will kill him, and only two very specific friends can stop it. Greirat's third journey has no survivors. After two successful scavenging runs from the undead settlement and Irithel of the Boreal Valley, Greirat will ask permission to go out a third time to pillage Lothric Castle. If you allow this, he does not come back. There is no known way to save Greirat from this third expedition. Patches will leave Firelink Shrine if you tell him where Greirat went, attempting to help, but will fail and return later, selling a hidden blessing as the only acknowledgement that someone died out there. Greirat's ashes can be found on the rooftop near the Grand Archives, past a group of Corvians sitting in the place where he fell. The game gives Greirat 3 acts: rescue, recovery, and finally an end that cannot be prevented, no matter how much you've invested in keeping him alive. He always was going to go one time too many. Yol of Londor is dying the whole time. Yol of Londor appears early in the game as a gentle, tired pilgrim near the foot of the High Wall bonfire in the undead settlement. He offers you free levels in exchange for drawing out your true strength, which means accepting dark sigils and deepening your hollowing. Most players use him gratefully and think little more of it, but reading Yol's lines carefully across multiple interactions reveals that he is quietly, gradually dying the entire time he's speaking to you. Each time he draws out your strength, he transfers something of himself into you, and each transfer costs him. He dies shortly after giving you his 5th and final level, seated near Uria of Londor's eventual spot in Firelink Shrine, having spent the last of whatever life he had left, ensuring your hollowing reached the point it needed to reach. He dies in service to a plan he believed in completely, at a cost he accepted entirely, for a lord he will never see crowned. Uria of Londor has 3 sisters, and 2 of them are in the game. Uria of Londor, the dark, regal figure who appears after Yol's death and begins orchestrating the usurpation of Fire Questline, is the middle child of 3 sisters who together founded the Sable Church of Londor. The eldest sister, Elfrida, left the church and eventually found her way into the painted world of Ariandel, where she becomes Sister Frida, one of the most difficult bosses in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. The youngest sister, Liliane, appears only in the cutscene for the usurpation of fire ending, standing beside Yuria as you claim the flame. Yuria herself is connected to Darkstalker Kati, the primordial serpent who appeared in the first Dark Souls and sought the Age of Dark. Her entire questline, her manipulation of Henri's fate, and her presence in Firelink Shrine are all part of a plan that stretches back through multiple games and multiple cycles of the world. The Sable Church did not begin with Dark Souls 3. It merely arrives there. Curing your hollowing destroys Yuria's questline entirely. If you accept Dark Sigils from Yol and begin down the path of the Lord of Hollows questline, there is one action that will undo everything without any warning. Curing the Dark Sigil. The Firekeeper, once given the Firekeeper soul found at the top of Firelink Shrine's tower, gains the ability to remove the Dark Sigil from your character. Doing so costs souls, but it also immediately and permanently causes Yuria of Lundor to leave Firelink Shrine without a word, ending her questline for the rest of that playthrough. The game never explains this consequence. There is no warning message, no prompt asking if you're sure. Yuria simply vanishes. You can use purging stones to reduce your hollowing level back to 0 without breaking the questline, but healing the actual sigil is irreversible. Many players discovered this too late, only realizing what they'd done when Yuria's usual spot stood empty and nothing remained but the echo of her absence. Orbeck of Vinheim is watching you, more closely than you think. Orbeck of Vinheim is a reclusive sorcerer found near the Crystal Sage boss in the Road of Sacrifices. He's cautious, a little paranoid, and very particular about who he teaches. To even get him to speak to you, your character must have at least 10 intelligence, which he appears to check simply by looking at you. What's less obvious is that Orbeck has his own quiet internal clock running the entire time he's in Firelink Shrine. If you collect too many scrolls and he decides you're not making fast enough progress, or if you purchase a certain number of his spells, his attitude shifts. Yuria of Lundor, if present, will eventually warn you that Orbeck has declared himself Lord of Hollows, which she treats as a political threat to your rule. You can handle this by simply buying all his spells and sending him away peacefully, at which point he departs to Vinheim and you never see him again. Or you can retrieve his ashes for Yuria instead. The nestling's name in the credits is different from what players call it. When Dark Souls 3's credits roll, the mysterious crow on the roof of Firelink Shrine is listed as simply Nestling, a quiet, small name for a character most players would never think to look for in the credits. This is consistent with the crow's counterparts across the series. In Demon's Souls, the trade crow was also nameless. In Dark Souls 1, the crow that carries you to the Undead Asylum was eventually confirmed as Snuggly in the official strategy guide, the same name used by the trading crow in that game. The community name Pickle Pea Pumper Rum isn't wrong exactly, but it's taken from the crow's own chanting rather than any official designation. Like many things in this world, the creature's true name exists only in the quiet margins, recorded once in a list of credits most players close before it finishes scrolling. Hawkwood was the crestfallen warrior. All along, Hawkwood the deserter sits alone near the central bonfire at Firelink Shrine when you first arrive, slumped in a posture of exhaustion, and he gives you the collapse gesture when you speak to him, a gesture that has him simply falling flat on his back in defeat. This is not a coincidence. Hawkwood occupies the same narrative role as the crestfallen warrior from Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1, and Salden, from Dark Souls 2. The early NPC whose whole purpose is to be a mirror of where you might end up if you stop trying. He's already stopped trying. He deserted the undead legion of Farron, the Abyss Watchers, when he decided he was unfit to be an unkindled searching for the Lords of Cinder. He's been sitting there ever since, watching other undead come through, watching them press on into the dark. But unlike the crestfallen warriors of earlier games, Hawkwood has an arc. He's not just a warning. He has a destination. Hawkwood leaves his shield at a grave before he goes. After you defeat the Abyss Watchers, Hawkwood's questline begins to move quietly forward. He says a few more things, receives the news of the Watchers' fall with a complicated mix of emotions, and then eventually vanishes from Firelink Shrine. When he goes, he leaves his shield behind. You can find Hawkwood's shield resting against a gravestone just outside and to the right of the main entrance of Firelink Shrine, near where a starved hound patrols. The description of the shield notes that the Abyss Watcher's swordsmanship style did not normally allow for shields, and that Hawkwood's possession of one was itself proof of his failure, his defeat, his unworthiness. He's left it behind deliberately, as if finally letting go of the evidence of his shortcoming. He's going somewhere he doesn't need a shield anymore. Hawkwood's dragon ambitions end in a duel to the death. What Hawkwood is going somewhere to become is a dragon. After departing Firelink Shrine, he eventually makes his way to Archdragon Peak, where his summoning sign appears near the Great Belfry bonfire. He can be summoned there, though true to his character, he runs in the opposite direction from the nameless king boss, and instead heads toward the altar at the top of the mountain to perform the Path of the Dragon gesture. Once you obtain the Twinkling Dragon Torso Stone yourself, Andre the Blacksmith passes you a message from Hawkwood, challenging you to a duel at the Abyss Watcher's mausoleum in Farron Keep. He wants the stone. He needs it to complete his transformation. He shows up with his Farron greatsword instead of the bastard sword he carried before, a shift that carries its own quiet symbolism. And he has 7 Estus flasks. The man who once lay flat on the floor in defeat fights for his dreams until his last breath. Ringfinger Leonhard was disfigured and chose not to be healed. Ringfinger Leonhard, the elegant, dangerous member of Rosaria's Fingers who first greets you in Firelink Shrine with a handful of cracked red-eye orbs, has a backstory buried in item descriptions and contextual lore that most players never piece together. Leonhard was born into royalty. He mastered both sorcery and swordsmanship, and at some point, he was severely burned and disfigured by fire, leaving scars across his body that drove him to seek Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth. Rosaria has the power to reincarnate, to reshape the flesh of those who bring her pale tongues. Leonhard came to her seeking to restore his appearance, but something changed when he met her. Instead of using Rosaria's gift for himself, he chose to abandon his original purpose entirely and become her sworn protector, her Ringfinger. He carries disfiguring scars through the rest of the game because of a decision made in her presence. A decision the game never explains, and which speaks to something that happened between them that we are never allowed to see. Leonhard's crescent moon sword points toward a hidden allegiance. When you eventually invade Leonhard's world and defeat him in Guinevere's former quarters in Anor Londo, he drops the crescent moon sword, a weapon that fires beams resembling the signature attack of the Moonlight Greatsword. The moon motif is notably associated with the Dark Moon Blades, the covenant dedicated to Gwyndolin and the divine order of the gods. Leonhard serves Rosaria's Fingers an invasion covenant, and in that role he should be an enemy of order and divine law. And yet the weapon he carries is deeply, unmistakably lunar. Some players have theorized that Leonhard may have once served the Dark Moon Order, or secretly respected the gods he appears to oppose. Others note that he brings Rosaria's stolen soul specifically to Guinevere's old chambers, a location loaded with the memory of the old gods. He carries the symbol of the moon into the bed of the sun goddess. Whatever he believed, he carried it all the way to the end. Rosaria, maybe Guinevere, the princess of sunlight. Rosaria, mother of rebirth, sits silently in her chamber in the Cathedral of the Deep, surrounded by man-grubs and the offerings of her devotees. She never speaks, she never moves, and almost nothing about her past is explicitly stated. But the lore thread surrounding her suggests something almost impossible. That Rosaria may be Guinevere, the princess of sunlight from the original Dark Souls, one of Gwyn's divine children who appeared in Anor Londo. After the events of Dark Souls 1, Guinevere is implied to have left her world and started a family. Rosaria's soul, when offered to Ludleth of Corlin for transposition, produces bountiful sunlight, a miracle that in Dark Souls 1 belongs specifically to Guinevere. Leonhard takes her soul specifically to Guinevere's old chambers in Anor Londo. The man-grubs that serve her mirror the egg carriers that served the fair lady in Izalith, and both women are worshipped from their bedside by devoted followers who collect something precious for them. The black eye orb pulses in a specific room for a reason. After following Leonhard's questline far enough, after you've offered Rosaria a pale tongue and spoken with him in her chamber, you will eventually return to find Rosaria dead, her soul stolen, and a black eye orb resting near her body. The orb is key to a specific location, Guinevere's former bedchamber in Anor Londo, above the Aldrich boss room. When you take either of the two lifts in the back of that room upward, the black eye orb activates and allows you to invade Leonhard's world. The specificity of this trigger, this room, this lift, connects Leonhard's betrayal directly to the divine lineage he was engaging with. He didn't just steal a soul, he took it to a place that mattered. And the orb follows that gravity, pulling you toward the same destination like a compass pointing at something it can't quite name, but knows is there. The shrine handmaid is watching everything. The old woman who sells items from behind a counter in Firelink Shrine, the shrine handmaid, is one of the most overlooked characters in the game. She doesn't have a complex quest line. She doesn't go anywhere. She just sits there, slightly hunched, and sells you things. But she is tracking the deaths of every NPC in the game. Whenever a merchant dies, or an NPC's questline ends, the items they sold become available through the Shrine Handmaid, but only after you bring her their ashes. This means she's cataloguing the fallout of every choice you make, every questline you break, every NPC you accidentally or deliberately kill. The evidence of it ends up in her hands. She also has unique dialogue if you bring her ashes before she's offered you anything, where she acknowledges the nature of what she's receiving. She knows what ashes mean in this world. She's been collecting them for a long time. Ludleth of Corlan cannot be permanently killed. Seated on one of the 5 thrones of the Lords of Cinder in Firelink Shrine, tiny and ancient and slightly too cheerful about everything, Ludleth of Kurland is the only Lord of Cinder who actually chose his fate. He linked the fire willingly, burning himself down to a charred, diminished figure, and he's been sitting there ever since. If you kill him, which you can do, though there's little reason to, he will respawn when you reload the area. He cannot be permanently removed from the game. He also holds onto the transposing kiln if you give it to him, and even after placing all 4 Lord Cinders on their thrones, causes his body to expire. He continues transposing souls if you approach his empty throne. His persistence is not just mechanical. His whole identity is built around the willingness to endure. The Firelink Shrine has a dark twin in the Untended Graves. The Untended Graves is a hidden area accessed through a secret wall behind Okiris's boss arena, and it presents one of the most haunting discoveries in the game. A version of Firelink Shrine swallowed in darkness, bonfire extinguished, NPCs absent, or replaced with hostile phantoms. This is not a reflection of what Firelink was. It is reflection of what it might become, or what it once was, in a different age of the cycle. Champion Gundir, who serves as the boss of this dark shrine, is an earlier unkindled who failed his duty, who arrived too late when the fire had already faded. He is what you might have been, the eyes of a firekeeper, hidden in a chest in this shadow version of Firelink, were sealed here because they showed something no one in the age of fire was supposed to see. The Dark Firelink doesn't just contain secrets, it is one. Irina of Karim wanted to become a firekeeper. Irina of Karim is found imprisoned in the undead settlement, sitting in a cell in the dark with nothing but the sound of her own breathing. She is blind, gentle, and deeply faithful. A miracle rite who can teach you divine spells if you free her and bring her sacred tomes. But her item descriptions reveal something that most players never discover. Irina originally came to Lothric with a single purpose, which was to become a firekeeper. She trained for it. She crossed vast distances to reach Lothric Castle. But something went wrong along the way, something the game does not make explicit, and she ended up imprisoned instead. Her ambition interrupted, her purpose suspended, waiting in the dark for a rescuer who may or may not have come before. If you guide her questline well, avoiding the dark miracles entirely, she eventually does become a firekeeper, taking up a post in the tower behind Firelink Shrine. She finds her purpose, just not in the way she planned. Aegon of Karim will turn against you if Irina falls. Aegon of Karim is a heavily armored knight who guards Irina's cell and greets you with barely concealed hostility even after you free her. He makes it clear from the beginning that his entire purpose is Irina's protection, that his presence at her side is not optional, it is his sworn duty, and he is watching you carefully to see whether you will prove worthy of the trust implied by freeing her. If you lead Irina down the dark path, if you give her the Londor Braille Divine Tome or the Deep Braille Divine Tome, and she purchases dark miracles from them, Aegon takes her away. He becomes hostile to you, and if you push far enough, you fight him, and after defeating him, his Morn's great hammer and moaning shield can be looted from his body. What's quietly devastating is that Aegon doesn't hate you for the dark miracles. He hates you for breaking something he had dedicated himself to protecting. He kept his vow. You didn't. Company Captain Yorshka is a prisoner who doesn't know it. High in a tower above Irithil of the Boreal Valley, accessible only through an invisible walkway that requires careful and counterintuitive navigation, sits Company Captain Yorshka, a strange half-dragon figure who leads the Blades of the Dark Moon Covenant. She's kind, soft-spoken, and she speaks fondly of her brother, who she calls Gwyndolin. She doesn't understand that the world has changed. She doesn't know that the brother she loves has been consumed by Aldrich, devourer of gods, absorbed into the slithering mass of bones and dream flesh somewhere beneath Anor Londo. She is waiting in her tower for someone who will never come back. The covenant she leads exists in her name, but the god it served is gone. She is not imprisoned in any traditional sense. There are no chains, but the invisible walkway that leads to her tower means the path to her is one that almost no one takes. And she has been alone up there, faithful and unknowing, for a very long time. Siris of the Sunless Realms is hunting her own grandfather. Siris of the Sunless Realms first appears in Firelink Shrine after you speak to Henri and Horace at the Road of Sacrifices, pledging herself as your knight in a brief, earnest ceremony. She is a member of the Blades of the Dark Moon, devoted to a righteous path of hunting dark invaders. Most players appreciate her as a summon sign and move on, but the driving force of her questline is deeply personal. She is hunting Holy Knight Hodrick, her own grandfather, who has hollowed and gone mad within the Pit of Hollows in the undead settlement. She needs your help to kill him, and at the end of her questline, after fighting him together in the undead settlement, she gives herself over to grief entirely. She dies near his grave. You find her body with the sunless talisman lying on it, as if she'd simply decided that what she came to do had been done, and there was nothing left to keep her standing. Hodrick was the one, luring people into cages. The cage merchant encountered at the Road of Sacrifices, a figure inside a swinging cage who offers to let you climb in for a reason that is never clearly explained, is connected to Holy Knight Hodrick, Siris's hollow grandfather. The Moundmaker's Covenant, which grants the ability to invade and potentially help or harm players in chaotic ways, is accessible through Hodrick in the Pit of Hollows. The cage is part of how the Moundmaker's world operates. What makes this particularly dark is that Hodrick, even in his hollow, maddened state, is still operating. He's still present at the cage, still trying to lure people in, still performing his role even though his mind is gone. The institution of the Moundmakers persists in the shell of what used to be Siris's grandfather, a knight of integrity who has become a mechanism for chaos. Cornyx of the Great Swamp teaches fire from a cage. Cornyx of the Great Swamp is found imprisoned in a large wooden cage hanging above the undead settlement's landscape near the fire-lit towers and ash-covered cliffs. He's cheerful about it, oddly enough. He's been up there for a while, by the sound of things, just waiting for someone to pass by who might want to learn pyromancy. Free him, and he takes up residence in Firelink Shrine, where he'll upgrade your pyromancy flame and teach you spells. But what makes Cornyx quietly interesting is his connection to Cuculus, a fellow pyromancer whose summon sign appears later in the game, leading into the Karthus Flame Arc section. Cuculus doesn't survive. Their ashes eventually appear in the game, and Cornyx's reaction to receiving them is one of the few moments in the game where a merchant actually stops being functional and becomes something closer to grief-stricken. He was waiting for his student. They never came home. The giant of the undead settlement is protecting the white birches. Above the undead settlement, firing enormous arrows across the rooftops and occasionally killing players who aren't paying attention, sits a giant. Most players approach him as a hazard, something to navigate around or eventually neutralize. But if you climb the tower he occupies and speak to him, he gives you a small pale eye. Carrying this eye marks you as a friend, and the giant will stop targeting you. He also protects anything near the white birch trees scattered through the settlement and beyond. Those pale trees with long, distinctive branches. If you go to those trees while carrying the eye, the giant's arrows will seek out and kill nearby enemies for you at no cost and without needing to be asked. He's been doing this for a long time, long before you arrived. The giants of Souls games have a difficult history, and this one chose to spend his remaining time as a protector of small, pale trees and anyone who trusts him enough to carry his gift. Blacksmith Andre has been at the forge since the beginning. Andre of Astora, the blacksmith who hammers away in the lower level of Firelink Shrine with quiet contentment, is, according to most lore interpretations, the same Andre who appeared in the original Dark Souls, upgraded weapons in the Undead Parish, and was associated with the lightning-struck ruins of Astora. He has not aged visibly. He doesn't seem particularly troubled by the passage of time. He was there when the first flame was first linked, and he is still there in what is implied to be the final age of that cycle. He is not undead, as far as anyone can tell. He is not a lord, or a demon, or a hollow. He's simply a blacksmith who has found his purpose and remains in it across the entire sweep of an age. His hammering in the background of Firelink Shrine is the most constant sound in the game, a rhythm that has outlasted gods. Carla the Witch has the cruelest introduction in the game. Carla is a Firelink Shrine vendor who specializes in dark sorceries and dark miracles. She's quiet, enigmatic, and clearly carrying damage she has no intention of explaining. Finding her requires navigating one of the worst areas in the game, Irithyll Dungeon, and locating a cell in the dungeon's lowest level, which requires a specific jailer's key that most players miss entirely. The process of getting Carla out is frustrating by design. And then, once you bring her back to Firelink Shrine, she sits in a corner and speaks in half-finished sentences about fire and darkness and things that were taken from her. Her item descriptions hint at a life shaped by persecution. Dark sorceries have long been viewed as heretical in this world, and those who study them have typically paid a price for it. Carla doesn't explain her history. She simply presents it, quietly, in the space between her words. The cage key to free Carla is easy to miss. Carla's cell in Irithyll Dungeon requires a specific item to open, the jailer's key ring, which is found in the dungeon's lower floor, in an area populated by several jailers and their unsettling lanterns. The jailers are among the most dangerous standard enemies in the game. Their presence temporarily reduces your maximum HP, and they can whittle you down before you've had a chance to react. The key is tucked into a corner of the lower dungeon that many players bypass entirely, because the main path through the area doesn't require you to go there. It's not signposted. There's no visible indication that something important is hidden past those particular enemies. Carla waits in her cell for players who go looking, who are thorough, who don't take the path of least resistance. In a game full of NPCs you can miss, Carla is perhaps the one most specifically protected by the game's own difficulty. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley was Sullivan's prisoner. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley, one of the game's most visually arresting bosses, and one you can optionally fight extremely early, occupies a specific space in the NPC ecosystem of Dark Souls 3. She was once a human woman, and she was based on item descriptions from her armor and her soul, assigned by Pontiff Sullivan to serve as a knight. But Sullivan also gave her the Pontiff's left eye ring, which inflicts a curse she was never able to escape, something that drove the hollowing process faster than it otherwise would have gone. She's not in her boss room by choice. She's there because she was sent there, and the gift her master gave her made it impossible to leave. Her incense and smoke and her strange, unhurried movements in combat suggest something that was once deliberate and controlled and has become something else entirely, still following the shape of its old purpose, even after the purpose is gone. Pontiff Sulivan was born. Inside a painting, Pontiff Sulivan of Erythil is one of the game's most elegant and terrifying figures. A sorcerer king who conquered Erythil of the Boreal Valley, locked Gwyndolin away, and rewrote the divine order of Lothric according to his own ambitions. What makes him uniquely sinister is that he is not native to this world at all. The Frozen Weapons sorcery description states directly, Sulivan was born and raised inside the painting, yet had little use for his frigid homeland, since he had not yet experienced loss. He came from the painted world of Ariandel, the same cold, decaying realm you explore in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. The lore surrounding Sister Frida reinforces this connection. He is an outsider who entered the real world from a constructed reality, and in that constructed reality, he learned enough sorcery and ambition to walk into Erythil and begin dismantling its divine order from within. He is the outsider who became the most powerful figure in Lothric's political landscape. The burning tree in the undead settlement is the center of a dark faith. The great burning tree at the center of the undead settlement, the one surrounded by hollowed worshippers pressing their faces against its bark, is one of the most visually striking and least explained images in the game. Loretta's bone hangs from its branches, and the evangelists who minister to the settlement gather their flock around it as if it were sacred. The evangelist sets item description notes that these women came to enlighten the inhabitants of the undead settlement and sent carriers on the path of sacrifice, meaning the road of sacrifices leading to the Cathedral of the Deep and ultimately to Aldrich. What the burning tree represents in their doctrine isn't entirely clear, but the devotion around it suggests something deeply ritualistic. Hollows drawn to fire, guided there by missionaries, pressing themselves against something they may not understand but cannot leave. The game never names the tree or explains its origin. It simply burns, and people gather, and that in itself is one of the more quietly disturbing images in a world built on them. Emma carries a secret, straight to her last breath. Emma, High Priestess of Lothric, is the woman who guards the entrance to Lothric Castle and asks you to seek out the Lords of Cinder. She is the first authority figure you encounter, who gives you a real task, a real direction. She holds the small doll, which lets you pass into Erythil. She is pious, composed, and clearly carrying something enormous behind her careful words. What she's carrying is the knowledge of what Lothric himself decided. The young prince, the chosen one, the one she raised and trained and prepared, simply refused. He refused to link the fire. He chose to let the world end rather than sacrifice himself. Emma spends her last moments giving you what you need to carry out a duty she raised someone else to carry, someone who then turned away from it. When she dies, she gives you the basin that leads to the princes. She holds on just long enough to make sure someone else can finish what she couldn't. The way the giant arrows miss you is the giant choosing. When the giant of the undead settlement fires enormous arrows across the area, there is a specific rule at work that most players either dismiss as game design or never notice at all. The arrows do not miss randomly. The giant is aiming at enemies, not at you, but only if you've spoken to him and received his pale eye. The eye is his mark of recognition. When you carry it, he identifies you as something worth protecting, rather than something worth targeting. The system is entirely silent. He never explains it. He never acknowledges the protection he's extending. He just fires, and the arrows find the things that threaten you, and miss the things that don't. It's an act of care expressed entirely through the trajectory of enormous wooden stakes in a world where care is almost never expressed any other way. The Pools of Man were people before they were monsters. In several locations across Dark Souls 3, most visibly on the rooftops of the High Wall of Lothric, there are figures that appear initially human, kneeling or standing in positions that suggest rest or prayer, who then transform horrifically when you approach or attack them. These Pools of Man creatures burst out of hollow human forms, consuming the body from within. The wiki describes them as hollows that have been corrupted by the abyss. What makes them disturbing beyond the transformation itself is the posture they hold before it happens. These are not enemies placed to fight you. They are kneeling. They are praying. The Follow a Torch description references the historical use of fire to combat a pus manifestation of the abyss within man, suggesting this kind of corruption has appeared before. The kneeling posture may be the last act of the person inside, trying to stay still, trying not to become what they're about to become. The corruption didn't create a monster. It found one already there, and grew until it had no more room to hide. The Firekeeper describes her own blindness as a mercy. If you speak to the Firekeeper extensively across multiple conversations, one of her lines touches directly on her blindfold. She does not describe it as a constraint or a cruelty. She describes it, in her careful and measured way, as something that allows her to perceive the flame more clearly, that by removing the noise of the visible world, she can attend more fully to the light she's meant to tend. Whether this is something she genuinely believes or something she was taught to believe is left entirely to interpretation. The Firekeeper set found in the tower behind Firelink Shrine, worn by a deceased Firekeeper, describes the tradition of binding their sight as a way to prevent distraction. The living Firekeeper has made peace with the same tradition. She tends the fire without seeing it, perceiving it through something quieter and more fundamental than sight. In Lothric, that may be the only kind of peace on offer. Pickle P has a hidden way. In Without the Tower key, most players assume the only way to reach the nestling crow on the roof of Firelink Shrine is to purchase the tower key from the shrine handmaid for 20,000 souls. A substantial expense, especially early in the game, but there's a second path that almost no one discovers without being told. On the exterior of Firelink Shrine, near the tower, a large fallen tree leans at an angle against the roof. If you sprint up along the bark of that tilted tree and jump at the right moment, you can land on the orange-tiled roof and walk your way around to the nest where the crow waits, chanting its strange two-word vocabulary at the sky. This works from the very beginning of the game, costs nothing, and means you can begin trading with the crow before you've ever spent a single soul on the tower key. The game hides a path in plain sight, in the shape of a fallen tree that most players walk past without a second glance. Horace left Prism, stones, to guide Henri. Before Horace hollowed and became lost in the cave beneath the smouldering lake, he and Henri had a system. Throughout the catacombs of Carthus, small prism stones, brightly coloured pebbles that squeal when you fall too far, used as waymarkers, are scattered along the paths Henri takes. These weren't placed there by the level designers for player navigation. In the context of the quest line, they're Horace's markers for Henri, left before he descended into the lake and lost his mind. Henri mentions laying prism stones to guide Horace back, mirroring the same practice. Two people navigating a hostile world by leaving each other small bright stones, and then one of them goes somewhere the stones can't follow. When Henri speaks in the catacombs about hoping Horace will find his way back, the stones already scattered around them are both a reassurance and a quiet, devastating hint that he isn't coming. The shrine handmaid wears the same armor as a dead keeper. The shrine, handmaid's clothing, the drab grey-brown wraps and coverings she wears as she sells items from behind her counter, matches or closely resembles the attire of the dead firekeepers found in the world of Lothric. Firekeepers who have been relieved of their duties or who have died in service of previous linkings of the flame are found in various states of decay throughout the game's secret areas. The shrine handmaid is old enough and present enough that her history is genuinely unclear. She sells you items, she accepts ashes, she never explains herself. The clothing connection, subtle, never stated, never confirmed, threads through the question of who she was before she was the person behind that counter, and whether the Firelink shrine she serves now is the first she's attended, or simply the one she's on when the current cycle ends. If you do not collect all 5 dark sigils from Yoel of Lundor before defeating the Abyss Watchers, if you let his window close, or if he dies before you finish drawing out your true strength, Uria of Londor does not appear, but something else does. A hostile NPC called the Pale Shade of Lundor will invade your world twice, once in Farron Keep, and once in Irithil of the Boreal Valley. These invasions are the consequence of failing Londor's plan. The Pale Shade wears the Londor Pale Shade armor set, which you can buy from the Shrine Handmaid after defeating it, and attacks without dialogue or explanation, a dark mirror of what might have been. If you successfully complete the Usurpation of Fire questline, however, the Pale Shade becomes a white phantom summon, available to help you in the final fight against the Soul of Cinder. Failure brings an enemy, success brings an ally. The Pale Shade remembers both. The man-grubs guarding Rosaria were once human, the grotesque, worm-like man-grubs that guard Rosaria's bedchamber in the Cathedral of the Deep. Long, pale bodies, vaguely human shapes stretched and distorted beyond recognition, are what happens when a member of Rosaria's fingers is reborn too many times. The game explicitly warns you of this. When you try to use Rosaria's rebirth mechanic more than 5 times in a single playthrough, a message appears. Persisting will transform you into a grub. The man-grubs are proof that this is not a metaphor. Yellowfinger Heisel, one of the invasion NPCs connected to the Fingers Covenant, is implied through lore to be further along this transformation than the others. The people who gave everything to Rosaria, who returned to her again and again, reshaping themselves for her, are still there in her chamber, still present, still attending her, just in a form that makes it impossible to leave. Yellowfinger Heisel is the only Covenant NPC who can become your friend. Yellowfinger Heisel is encountered first as a hostile invader in the Crucifixion Woods, a gangly, aggressive sorcerer who attacks you without preamble and who belongs to Rosaria's Fingers Covenant. Most players kill her, take the Xanthaus crown she drops, and move on. But if you offer a pale tongue to Rosaria after defeating Heisel in the Crucifixion Woods, something unexpected happens. Heisel's summons sign appears near the Keep Ruins bonfire in Farron Keep. She becomes available as a white phantom. The same NPC who invaded your world and tried to kill you can be summoned as an ally, standing beside you in cooperative play, wearing the same yellow crown. Whether this shift represents a change in her intentions or simply reflects the Covenant's complex relationship with violence and loyalty is one of those questions that Dark Souls lore enjoys leaving open. The Great Belfry summon sign that goes nowhere. Near the Great Belfry bonfire in Archdragon Peak, Hawkwood's summon sign appears. The same Hawkwood who has been sitting in Firelink Shrine calling himself a deserter. If you summon him here, he does not help you fight. He runs in the opposite direction, toward the altar at the top of the hill, where he performs the Path of the Dragon gesture as if you aren't there. He is using you, or rather, he is using the summon system to reach the place he needs to reach, to do the thing he came to do. It's one of the most honest summons in the game, in a strange way. A person pursuing their own goal without any pretense that they're there to serve yours. He thanks you, implicitly, by having the courtesy to show up at all. The altar is at the top of the hill. He gets there because you answered the sign. The pilgrim at the Darkmoon Tomb dies after the wedding. In the Darkmoon Tomb, the chamber beneath the rotating tower leading to Anor Londo, behind an illusory wall, a pilgrim of Londo waits to conduct the wedding ceremony between you and Henri. She speaks briefly, hands you the sword of Avowal, and gestures toward the altar where Henri lies. After the ceremony, if you come back, the pilgrim is dead. She is simply lying there, her role completed, her life apparently spent in the execution of it. There's no attack, no warning, no dramatic context. She was there to perform one function, and when the function was complete, the life she was holding went with it. She had the chameleon spell, a sorcery that allows the caster to disguise themselves as a piece of environmental geometry, suggesting she may have been hiding in plain sight for a very long time before you arrived. And then she wasn't needed anymore. Aldrich dreamed of the deep sea, and it changed him. Aldrich, devourer of gods, the Lord of Cinder, who occupies Anor Londo and must be returned to his throne, began his existence as a saint. He was revered. He was a figure of faith, and then he began eating people. The reason, according to item descriptions, is that Aldrich had visions, prophetic dreams of a deep, dark sea, of an age of the deep that lay somewhere beyond the current age of fire. He became obsessed with those visions. He began consuming flesh and bone not merely for sustenance, but because the act of consumption brought him closer, in some way he believed was real, to the deep that he had seen in his dreams. He ate so many people that he became a formless, slithering mass of bones and dark flesh. When you fight him in Anor Londo, Gwendolyn's hand reaches out of the dark mass, a reminder that the last thing Aldrich consumed before you arrived was a god. His great hunger began with a dream of the ocean floor. The deacons of the deep carry Aldrich's memory in their robes. The deacons of the deep, the mob of red-robed clerics you face as the boss of the Cathedral of the Deep, were once faithful servants of Aldrich when he was a saint. They venerated him. They carried his teachings, wore his colors, tended his cathedral. And then Aldrich began eating people, became something monstrous, and eventually left the cathedral entirely for Anor Londo to consume the gods. The deacons stayed behind. They are still in his cathedral, still wearing those same red robes, still carrying torches and incense as if any moment their saint might return. The archdeacon who leads them has essentially transferred the sacred fire of faith from Aldrich to the one who will come next, to whatever or whoever the cathedral now serves. They are keepers of a church whose God outgrew the church and left and did not look back. Orbeck was an assassin. Before he was a scholar. Most players encounter Orbeck of Vinheim as a studious, slightly guarded sorcery teacher, a man who wants scrolls, wants quiet, and wants to spend his time in the Crucifixion Woods, reading without interruption. His scholarly manner is convincing, but his own dialogue if you listen closely, cracks the illusion. Orbeck mentions in passing that before he came to Lothric, he worked as an assassin for the Dragon School of Vinheim, hired to kill people, which he did without understanding the full weight of what that meant. He says, quietly and without drama, that he was a fool who bloodied his hands without grasping the consequence of each life he took. After hollowing, the Dragon School exiled him. He came to Lothric not to serve anyone's agenda, but simply to learn what he always should have been learning before he was pointed in the wrong direction. His careful, cautious personality is the personality of a man who spent years taking without thinking and is now trying to give something back. Orbeck dies alone among books and chooses it. When Orbeck has been given all 4 sorcery scrolls and purchased all his available spells, he departs Firelink Shrine. He says goodbye. He thanks you. And then his corpse appears in the Grand Archives, seated in a chair near the bookshelves at the top of the first shortcut elevator inside the archives. He is surrounded by texts. He died reading in the place he always wanted to be, doing the thing he always wanted to do. His ashes are clenched in a fist that appears to be gripping a scroll even in death. There is no violence in his ending, no dramatic sacrifice, no fight. He simply went to the library he always dreamed of and ran out of time there. For a man who spent his life as someone else's weapon, it's one of the most quietly complete endings any NPC in the series receives. Yuria will ask you to kill Orbeck, and she's not wrong to worry. If Yuria of Lundor is present in Firelink Shrine, when Orbeck settles in, she will pull you aside and warn you that Orbeck has declared himself Lord of Hollows, which she frames as a political challenge to your rule and a threat to the Lundor questline. This sounds extreme. Orbeck is a quiet sorcery teacher who wants scrolls, but Yuria's concern makes a kind of internal logic. The Lord of Hollows questline is about power and legitimacy, and any undead who declares themselves a rival lord, even in jest, even in ignorance, represents a complication. If you bring Yuria his ashes, she rewards you with the Morian blade. The game does not force you to kill him. It presents the choice and lets you decide what kind of ruler you want to be. The most unsettling thing is that Yuria's paranoia, in a world this unstable, is arguably justified. Blackhand Gotthard never says a single word. Blackhand Gotthard is one of the game's most loyally present NPCs. His summon sign appears twice, for the Abyss, Watchers, and for Pontiff Sullivan, making him a reliable white phantom through the first half of the game. He gives you the "by my sword" gesture the first time you summon him, and then eventually you find his corpse at the entrance to the Grand Archives, slumped against the wall, holding the key that lets you inside, and the Gotthard Twinzards in his dead hands. Despite all of this, despite the summons, the gift, the death, the key, the implication of a full life of service and politics, Gotthard never says a single word. He's entirely silent as an NPC. Every piece of his story is told through item descriptions and the timing of his death. He served several kings of Lothric across multiple reigns, held a title given to only 3 people in all of history, and he never once opened his mouth in your presence. The third Black Hand has never been found. According to the description of the Black Hand armor set, the title of Black Hand, Lothric's most elite class of royal assassin, has been held by exactly 3 people throughout the kingdom's history. In the game, 2 of these people are identified: Blackhand Gotthard, who can be summoned and later found dead, and Blackhand Kamui, who fights you in the Grand Archives near the Twin Princes. The third Black Hand is never named, never shown, never confirmed. Their armor would presumably match the others, a paired weapon, a distinctive style, but no such figure appears, alive or dead, anywhere in the game. This is one of those blanks that the lore deliberately refuses to fill. 3 Black Hands, 2 found, 1 missing. Whether that third figure is still operating somewhere in Lothric, long dead in some unmarked corner, or simply an idea the game chose not to explain, is a question it leaves entirely open. Gotthard's death was likely an assassination. When Black Hand Gotthard's body appears at the Grand Archive's entrance, the timing is specific. It only shows up after you have defeated the Abyss Watchers, Aldrich, and Yorm, the first 3 Lords of Cinder. The implication that many lore readers have drawn from this is that Gotthard was killed precisely because he had been helping you collect the Lords. Someone, likely Black Hand Kamui, or the Loyalist faction within the Grand Archives, removed him because his assistance to the Ashen One represented a threat to the plan of keeping the Lords from their thrones. He is found directly in front of the door he needs to be dead to open. Whoever killed him either didn't think about the key, or didn't care, or wanted you to find the body on purpose. In a world full of quiet murders framed as other things, Gotthard's is among the quietest. Longfinger Kirk has been doing this for 2 games. Longfinger Kirk, who invades your world in the Cathedral of the Deep, wearing the distinctive spiked armor of thorns and fighting with a barbed sword, is almost certainly the same Kirk who invaded your world repeatedly in the original Dark Souls, known there as Kirk, Knight of Thorns. In the first game, Kirk invaded in service of the Chaos Servant Covenant, collecting humanity for the Fair Lady. In Dark Souls 3, he invades in service of Rosaria's Fingers, collecting pale tongues for Rosaria. The character has shifted allegiances from one silent, devoted master to another, from the Fair Lady to Rosaria. But the essential behavior has not changed. He is a devoted servant who expresses that devotion through violence, and his body ends up in his mistress's chamber after his defeat, armor and all, lying near the person he gave everything for. Some people, the game suggests, are defined by their loyalty more than by anything else. Creighton was sentenced to death and escaped. Creighton the Wanderer, who invades your world on the Irithel Bridge as part of Cyrus's questline, is wearing a helmet with a very specific history. The executioner's hood he wears is the kind placed on criminals who have been sentenced to death, which means Creighton was, at some point before the events of Dark Souls 3, caught, convicted, and scheduled to be executed for his crimes. The description of his armor notes that it was an infamous killer from Mirror who escaped before the execution could be carried out. A character in Dark Souls 2 mentions hearing about a Cray-something who killed people in Mirror and ran before justice could reach him. That figure, who made it all the way from Mirror to Drangleic to Irithel, never stopped running and never stopped fighting. He shows up in your world wearing the hood of a condemned man, as if it's a badge of identity rather than a mark of shame. Creighton goes silent between games. In Dark Souls 2, Creighton was one of the most talkative NPC antagonists in the series. Aggressive, opinionated, constantly insisting that his rival mild-mannered Part was the real criminal while cheerfully admitting to his own violence. He had speeches. He had grievances. He had a specific kind of performance about him that made him both dangerous and almost comical. In Dark Souls 3, Creighton returns as an invader and says nothing at all. He does not speak. He does not announce himself. He does not explain what he's doing in Irithel or why he's hunting Cyrus. He just appears, attacks, and dies or withdraws. Whatever journey he took between the two games, from Drangleic to Lothric, seems to have stripped away the part of him that narrated himself to others. What's left is just the violence, without the commentary. Slave Knight Gale was praying for you before you arrived. When you first encounter Slave Knight Gale in the Cathedral of the Deep, he is kneeling in front of a statue near the Cleansing Chapel bonfire, head bowed, motionless. He has been there for some time, based on his dialogue and the context of his mission, to find an Ashen One who could ignite the fire in the painted world and help create new pigment for a young painter. Gael has been searching for exactly the kind of person you represent. He came to the cathedral because it felt like the right place to wait for divine assistance. He was, in the truest sense, praying for you specifically, without knowing your name or your face, just trusting that eventually someone capable would pass through this door. When you arrive, his relief is palpable. He says words to the effect of "at last," as if the wait has been real and long, and he had begun to wonder. The painter's word for Gale is not what it seems in English. In the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, the young painter locked in the attic of the main building refers to Slave Knight Gale as Uncle Gale, a term of endearment that most Western players took as a literal family relationship. It is not. The original Japanese text of the game clarifies that the term she uses is better translated as mentor or guide, a respectful address for someone older who looks after you, not a claim of blood relation. The distinction matters for the lore because it means the painter and Gale are not family. He is someone who chose her, and she chose a word that communicated both closeness and reverence. He is her Gale, and she is his lady, and the entire arc of the Ring City DLC is built around what he was willing to sacrifice to give her what she needed to make something new. Gale knew the Dark Soul would destroy him. The soul description of Slave Knight Gale is one of the bleakest in the series. It states that Gale sought the blood of the Dark Soul as pigment for the painted world, and then adds something that most people gloss past. But Gale knew he was no champion, that the Dark Soul would likely ruin him, and that he had little hope of a safe return. He knew. He understood before he set out to the Ringed City, and before he consumed the Pygmy Lord's dried blood, that the Dark Soul was too powerful for an ordinary slave knight to contain. He went anyway. He consumed it anyway, and by the time you find him at the end of time, at the thrones of the Pygmy Kings, his mind is gone, but the blood is ready, burning in his ruined body, waiting for you to take it to the painter who needs it. He delivered. He just didn't get to come back. Filianore was the lock on the world's end. In the deepest parts of the Ring City, past the Ring Knights and the ancient architecture and the invisible stairways, Filianore lies sleeping in a tower, a daughter of Gwyn, one of the old gods, cradling a strange shell. The residents of the Ring City who speak to you before you reach her ask you not to disturb her rest. They say she has been sleeping for a very long time. If you touch the shell she holds, it shatters, and everything changes. The illusion maintaining the Ring City collapses, time convulses, and you emerge in a future so distant that Lothric itself is in ruins, and the world has narrowed to ash and dark sky. Filianore's sleep was not passive. It was the mechanism keeping a version of the city preserved, a pocket of time held still by the presence of a sleeping god. The moment she wakes, even posthumously, through the breaking of the shell, the preservation ends. Filianore's city was already in ruins before you arrived, a small detail that most players miss. is that when you first enter the ringed city, one of the hollow wanderers near the entrance speaks to you and mentions that the city you are seeing is not real, that it is already in ruins, that what you're walking through is an illusion maintained by Filianor's sleeping presence. The orderly streets, the intact architecture, the sense of a city still standing. All of it is constructed from old light, a memory the city is projecting of itself. The real ringed city is what you emerge into after you shatter the shell. Rubble, ash, nothing. You walked through a beautiful lie the whole time, and the city was politely, desperately maintaining it for you until you reached the one person you absolutely should not have woken. Amnesiac Lap will kick you off a ledge with a smile. In the Ringed City DLC, a cheerful, forgetful Hollow Knight introduces himself as Lap. He cannot remember his real name, he says, so that's what he's calling himself. He is warm, generous, toasts you with Siegbräu, helps you find the purging monument, and seems entirely without malice. His voice and manner, and even his habit of saying unbreakable, are familiar if you've spent any time with unbreakable patches. But the reveal arrives without warning. After you tell him where the purging monument is and help him restore his memories, Lap invites you to look at a view from a high ledge and then kicks you off it. He removes his helmet. It's Patches. It has been Patches the entire time. The hollowing stripped away his identity and left something gentler behind. A version of him that didn't trick people, that wanted to help, that shared its food. The real Patches remembered himself and immediately went back to his old habits. The game lets you decide which one was the true self. Lap as Patches carries a deeper philosophical question. The community commentary around Lap and Patches has grown into something genuinely interesting. When Patches hollowed, his mind reset, and what emerged, without the accumulated cynicism and self-preservation instincts of a life lived on the margins, was a person who offered kindness and warmth and cooperation without ulterior motive. Lap, in his hollow state, is arguably a better person than Patches. Some readers of the lore have interpreted this as the game saying something about identity and corruption, that the true self, hidden beneath Patches' scheming, is the Lap who toasts strangers and worries about fulfilling promises. The wiki has noted a theory that Lap and Patches represent two sides of the human soul, the open, trusting core that Gwyn's manipulation buried, versus the self-protective surface that the Age of Fire taught people to wear. Whether that's what the developers intended or not, the parallel is there. Shira is the last faithful servant of Filianore. In the Ringed City, behind a locked door in one of the inner buildings, a woman named Shira speaks to you in a hushed voice through the door. She asks you to kill Dark Eater Midir, the massive dragon whose corruption is consuming the darkness it was tasked to guard. She gives you a sacred chime that belonged to Filianore. She can be summoned to fight alongside you against Midir if you've accepted her request. But if you disturb Filianore, if you wake her and shatter the shell and bring the city's illusion crashing down, Shira turns hostile. She attacks you the next time you enter the area, fighting with everything she has, because you have done the one thing she was placed there to prevent. She is not protecting the city for abstract reasons. She is protecting her sleeping mistress. When you destroy that sleep, you destroy the thing Shira organized her entire existence around. The Ringed City Hollow is a surviving pygmy lord. Near the entrance to the Ringed City, shortly after the first bonfire, a hollow figure in decayed royal robes crawls slowly across the ground, making its way toward the distant tower where Filianore sleeps. The description of its robes identifies it as pygmy royalty, a descendant of the original furtive pygmy, one of the pygmy lords who should be seated on the thrones at the world's end. This one escaped, or was exiled, or simply refused the fate that awaited the others, to sit on a throne slowly drained of the dark soul by Gale's passage. It is making its way somewhere, pulled by some impulse that hollowing has not fully erased. Some players have noted that there are 9 thrones in the final area, but only 8 seated pygmy lords, suggesting this crawler is the missing 9th. It never reaches wherever it is going. It crawls in silence at the edge of the world, with nowhere left to arrive. Gale's red cape carries 2 meanings. The red cape that Slave Knight Gale wears is one of the most visually striking details in all of Dark Souls 3. A vivid crimson in a world of grey ash and bone-coloured stone. According to item descriptions in the game, bright red cloth carries a specific symbolic weight in the lore of Lothric. The deacon's robes describe red as representing the blessing of fire, devotion to the flame and to the clerical tradition of Lothric. The Drake Blood armor describes red as representing the desire for blood. A different kind of hunger, a different kind of seeking. Gale's cape, then, sits precisely at the intersection of both. He seeks fire for the painter's world, and he seeks the blood of the dark soul as pigment. His cape is not an aesthetic choice. It is a symbol of his entire purpose, worn openly on his back for the length of an entire journey that ends at the threshold of everything. Nightslayer, Torrig has equipment from across multiple games. Nightslayer, Torrig, who invades you on the bridge near High Lord Wulna in the catacombs of Karthus, and can later be found as a non-hostile NPC beside the lava pool in Smouldering Lake, carries a combination of equipment that draws from multiple different corners of the Dark Souls universe. He wears the Black Iron set, the same armor worn by Black Iron Tarkus from the original Dark Souls. He wields the Fume Ultra Greatsword, a weapon from the crown of the old Iron King DLC in Dark Souls 2. And his ring, the Night Slayer's ring, has a description that references the frozen city of Elium Lois from the crown of the Ivory King DLC, also from Dark Souls 2. The wiki notes that Torrig is the only Dark Souls character to carry equipment associated with multiple DLCs. He never explains himself, but his inventory tells a story of someone who has been to places that have long since faded, and survived encounters with enemies that no longer exist anywhere else. His past is written in borrowed weapons and rings. Torrig echoes Black Iron Tarkus in a specific way. There is a deliberate visual and spatial echo between Nightslayer Torrig and Black Iron Tarkus from the original Dark Souls. Tarkus, one of the most beloved phantom NPCs in the series, was known for his ability to knock the Iron Golem off the top of Sen's fortress using sheer brute force. His armor was later found on a corpse that had fallen from the narrow rafters of Anor Londo, suggesting the unstoppable warrior eventually found something he couldn't handle, and fell. Torrig, fighting you on a destructible bridge above a drop, and then again beside a lava pool he can be knocked into, occupies the same archetype. A supremely powerful fighter in heavy armor, defined by the risk of falling. The wiki notes this parallel directly. Torrig even seems designed to be knocked off into the lava by the nearby hostile NPC Horus, an unscripted moment of environmental justice that players discovered by accident. The daughter of Crystal Creamhild follows Orbek's path. In the Grand Archives, if you progress far enough, a hostile female NPC sorcerer appears on a rooftop. The daughter of Crystal Creamhild. She is aggressive, difficult, and armed with powerful sorceries, but her presence in the Grand Archive specifically, connected to the Crystal Sage line of magic, suggests she was once a scholar or student in the same tradition as Orbeck. She holds Logan's scroll when defeated, which she drops on death. Logan's scroll is one of the 4 scrolls you can find and give to Orbeck to expand his teaching, and finding it on the body of a hostile rooftop sorcerer implies that the path of sorcery in Lothric is not a clean or safe one. Some people chase knowledge into the Grand Archives and become scholars. Others become something harder and more hostile. The scroll itself passes from her hands to yours to Orbeck's, completing a circuit the game never explicitly draws. The Old Wolf of Farron doesn't move. The Old Wolf of Farron, who presides over the watchdogs of Farron Covenant in the Farron Keep Swamp, is a massive sleeping wolf curled at the top of a ladder above the toxic bogs. He is enormous, ancient, and utterly still. You can approach him, interact with him to join the Covenant or offer wolf's blood sawgrass, and he accepts without opening his eyes. The Watchdogs Covenant is dedicated to guarding the slumbering undead legion of Farron, the Abyss Watchers, and the wolf is the embodiment of that duty, older than any of them. Item descriptions associated with the Covenant suggest this wolf has been sleeping and guarding for an unimaginable span of time. He does not acknowledge the scale of what has happened to Farron Keep, does not react to the toxic swamp that has consumed the perimeter. He guards. He sleeps. That is the entire scope of what he does, and the enormity of it never requires him to move. Velka's statue sits where no one looks, in the lowest level of the undead settlement, accessible through the sewers below the cliffs after purchasing the grave key from the shrine handmaid. There is a small, silent chamber containing a statue of Velka, the goddess of sin. Velka appears in no other visible form in Dark Souls 3. No body, no dialogue, no questline. But her statue is present, and interacting with it allows you to absolve your sins against NPCs you've attacked, restoring their dispositions toward you in exchange for souls. This function, the absolution of sins, has been associated with Velka's domain across every Dark Souls game. She is never here, but the system she represents persists because sin is one of the constants of this world. Her statue sits in a sewer, accessible only to players who buy a specific key and navigate through a narrow, rat-filled passage. She is the most quietly powerful presence in a game full of loud ones. The Swordmaster teaches you how to parry before the tutorial boss. Outside Firelink Shrine, near the cemetery path toward the ruined church, a figure called the Swordmaster sits quietly against the wall, occasionally patrolling in a short loop. He is an optional encounter, completely avoidable, attacking only if you initiate combat. But if you manage to kill him, he drops the Uchigatana and some useful early equipment, and he later becomes available as a summon sign. What makes him secretly significant is his placement. He is positioned exactly where a new player naturally walks after coming out of Firelink Shrine for the first time, along the path that leads toward the cemetery and early exploration. He is, based on the design of the space, a combat tutorial disguised as an encounter. He parries, he punishes, he demonstrates exactly the kind of attack patterns the game expects you to learn. His presence just before the main open world begins is not accidental. The cage beneath the Road of Sacrifices has a voice. Along the Road of Sacrifices, not far from the entrance to the Crucifixion Woods, there is a hanging cage being hauled along by a large, roaming enemy. Inside the cage is an NPC voice, a male voice that encourages you from inside the cage to climb in and join him. He offers the Moundmaker Covenant sigil if you comply. which grants the ability to invade and potentially help or harm other players in ambiguous ways. The voice never identifies itself clearly. The cage never explains itself. The offer is phrased in a way that implies something good waits inside, and the entire presentation is designed to feel like a trap. If you get into the cage and are transported, you end up in the Pit of Hollows, which is where Holy Knight Hodrick, Sirius's hollowed grandfather, awaits. The voice in the cage may be Hodrick's echo, drawing the desperate and the curious into his domain with the promise of something they haven't been told clearly enough to refuse. Gilligan's corpse is an Easter egg from Dark Souls 2. In the profaned capital, near the bonfire where you first arrive in that crumbling, toxic ruin of a city, there is a corpse beside a ladder. This corpse wears distinct clothing and has an item nearby, the stretch out gesture. The placement and armor of this corpse identify it as Gilligan, a merchant NPC from Dark Souls 2 who sold ladders. In Dark Souls 2, Gilligan sold you the ability to extend and retract ladders throughout the world, making him a merchant of vertical access. His corpse in the profaned capital is placed next to a ladder. It is such a precise, fond piece of cross-game tribute that it almost functions as a farewell, a nod to a quiet figure from an earlier world, given a resting place that matches who he was. The stretch-out gesture beside him is the game's version of reaching down to a friend who helped you climb. The jailers in Irithil Dungeon were once chosen undead. The jailers, the gaunt, pale, lantern-carrying figures who patrol the corridors of Irithil Dungeon, are among the most feared standard enemies in the game, not because of their raw power, but because of what their lanterns do: reduce the player's maximum HP as long as they remain within sight. The item description of the jailer's key ring notes that the jailers were once chosen undead themselves, people who were tasked with guarding this prison and who, over time, became something resembling the prisoners they were meant to contain. They walk the same corridors endlessly. They hold their lanterns up in the same searching gesture. Whatever they were before they were jailers has been completely replaced by the function of guarding, and the function has continued long past the point where anyone outside these walls still needs them to do it. The Archdeacon's Covenant exists without its Archdeacon. Archdeacon MacDonald is the founder of the Aldrich Faithful Covenant, the group of warriors who invade worlds near Anor Londo to kill players in defense of Aldrich's feeding ground. MacDonald himself is dead before the game begins, but his hand remains accessible as a specific item. The sacred chime of Filianor in the Ringed City can be traced through connections to MacDonald, whose ashes appear in the Irithil Dungeon. His covenant persists entirely through momentum and the loyalty of those who joined it, operating without any living leadership, guided only by the memory of a man who believed in Aldrich's hunger. The faithful invade because they were shaped to invade, because the system that MacDonald built is robust enough to function without him. He is a covenant leader who leads from a corpse, which in Lothric's terms is not even unusual. The profane capital has a specific sound you can hear if you stop. This is less an NPC secret than a world detail that shapes how NPCs are read, but players who have paused in the profane capital and simply listened have noted that the ambient audio of that area includes, beneath the wind and the distant fire, something that sounds almost like distant moaning or chanting. The profane flame, the fire that burns in the lower section of the capital without consuming what it touches, is connected in lore to the Irithil maidens who died in the capital trying to suppress it. Their sacrifices are buried in the architecture of the sound design. The jailers who escaped that event and ended up in the dungeon below carry something of that trauma in how they're designed. The entire area is haunted by the outcome of a ritual that failed, and the sound is part of how the game communicates that without saying it. Lion Knight Albert is the most historically obscure summon. Lion Knight Albert appears as a white phantom summon, sign outside the door to the Vault of the Boreal Valley boss fight, available very early in the game, at a moment when many players are still feeling their way through the systems. He gives you the beckon gesture when summoned. His armor and lore descriptions suggest he was a Knight of Lothric in service to the castle's military tradition, and the Lion Knight title appears to be a rank or designation within that tradition. He is one of the few summons in the game who assist you without any broader quest line, without any item reward beyond the gesture, and without any dialogue or setup. He simply offers his sign and his sword. His historical counterpart, a figure of comparable name in Dark Souls lore, suggests this may be a deliberate echo across games, but Lion Knight Albert in Dark Souls 3 keeps that connection quiet and lets the name carry whatever weight you bring to it. Aldrich Faithful members invade automatically near Aldrich. The Aldrich Faithful Covenant works differently from most other invasion covenants in Dark Souls 3. Its members don't manually invade. They are automatically summoned as dark spirits into worlds near Anor Londo when someone enters the Sentinel Zone where Aldrich's presence is felt. This means a faithful member can be relaxing in Fireling Shrine and suddenly find themselves dropped into another player's world to fight. The Covenant was established to protect Aldrich's feeding area while he consumed the gods. Even after Aldrich is dead in your world, the Covenant continues its function, because the system doesn't check whether Aldrich is still alive. It checks whether someone is in range. The boundary of the Sentinel Zone is invisible, unmarked, and has surprised countless players who wandered into Anor Londo's cathedral area without realizing they'd stepped inside a perimeter maintained by an absent god. Cornix dies before the credits. If you follow his full quest, the old Demon King's Foggate has no summons except Chorig and Cuculus. Nightslayer. Chorig, despite his hostile nature, can be summoned as a white phantom for the old Demon King boss fight, but only after you have first defeated him as an invader in the catacombs. His summon sign appears in a corner of the Demon Ruins bonfire room, and he is one of only 2 available summons for that fight, the other being Great Swamp Cuculus. The pairing is interesting. A warrior obsessed with combat and a pyromancer devoted to an old tradition, together fighting the last great demon. The old Demon King is one of the final survivors of a race that has been dwindling since before Dark Souls 1. A Demon King with almost no demons left to rule. Both summons carry that context. Chorig brings the weight of old wars. Cuculus brings fire from a swamp that stretches back through ages. The fight is a small elegiac ending for something that had already mostly faded. The Corvian settler knows what you're there to do. In the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, among the first figures you encounter in the cold, ash-covered painted world is a hollow Corvian settler crouched in the snow. He does not attack. He speaks to you, and what he says, in fractured, desperate words, is a plea. He asks you to burn the painting. He wants you to set fire to Ariandel, to end the rotten world the painting has become, so that the painter inside can make something new. He is fully hollow, partially, and yet this wish has survived the hollowing, this specific desire to see the world end and begin again. Other Corvians in the area will attack you on sight, defending the painting and Sister Frida's decree that the world must be preserved. This one chose differently. He is not protecting the world. He is welcoming the person who came to burn it, with what sounds almost like relief. Sir Wilhelm keeps the painter prisoner out of loyalty. Sir Wilhelm, the armored Black Knight who guards the upper floors of the painted world of Ariandel and attacks you with a heavy flail, is the appointed guardian of the painter. But his role is to keep her imprisoned in the attic, not to protect her in any conventional sense. He is loyal to Sister Frida, not to the painter herself. And Frida's decree is that the painting must not be remade, that Ariandel must not burn, that the status quo must be preserved even as the world rots around it. Wilhelm enforces this by keeping the painter away from any source of inspiration, any flame, any color. He has protection as confinement. His item descriptions and armor connect him to the old Sable Church tradition through Frida. And when you kill him, the cell key he carries lets you free the painter entirely. He is the last lock on a door that had no business being closed. The painting woman is trying to build you a new home. The painter trapped in the painted world of Ariandel, the young woman Gale calls his lady, is, by the time of the Ringed City DLC, finally painting. When you give her the blood of the dark soul, the pigment Gale spent his sanity and his body collecting, she tells you what she is making. A world, dark, cold, and gentle. A place where things can begin again. Many players have read the description of the new painting as a prototype for a world not unlike our own, or as a possible origin for another From Software game. What is certain is that she is painting for you, the Ashen One, as much as for herself or Gale. The final words she speaks are directed at you specifically, describing her painting as a home for those who have nothing left. After everything the Ashen One has done, all the cycles, all the lords, all the fire, she is offering the only thing a painter can, somewhere to rest. The sword hanging in every starting class loadout tells a story. Every starting class in Dark Souls 3 begins with a specific loadout, and the weapons and armor described in each class's item descriptions contain quiet lore about where that class comes from. The assassin begins with a weapon designed for silent killing from Vinheim, the same school Orbeck attended. The herald begins with a weapon associated with the Way of White, the clerical tradition that runs through the Souls series back to the original game. The knight begins with the Lothric Knight sword, tied directly to the castle's military tradition. These are not random loadouts. Every starting class is a character with a past, dropped into the game without explanation of how they got there or what they were doing before the bell rang and the undead began to rise. The weapons they carry are the last things they remember being. Yorm's great machete was not his original weapon. Yorm the Giant, the Lord of Cinder who rules the profaned capital, is associated in player culture primarily with the Storm Ruler, the unique weapon that Sigurd brings to the fight, specifically designed to harm Yorm, which only functions properly inside his boss room. But Yorm's own weapon, the great machete he drops, carries a description that reveals something about his history that the fight itself doesn't show. The fandom wiki confirms that Yorm was the descendant of an ancient conqueror, but was asked by the very people once subjugated by that lineage to rule and protect them instead. He fought on the front lines with a great shield for much of his life. But then, according to his weapon's description, one day, in place of his shield, a left-hand notch was added to his machete, enabling a more aggressive two-handed technique at the cost of his protection. This shift points to something deeply personal. Yorm is believed to have lost someone he cared for, and in grief, chose to fight with less regard for his own survival. The machete's notch is a wound worn publicly on the weapon itself. The Firekeeper will speak of dark endings, only if you give her the eyes. The Firekeeper's dialogue across the game is carefully measured. She speaks of the flame, of her purpose, of the nature of the Ashen One's duty. Most of her lines are calm, restrained, reflective of her role as keeper of the bonfire. But if you find the eyes of a Firekeeper in the untended graves and give them to her, her entire register shifts. She begins asking questions she has never been trained to ask. She wonders about a world where the flame is not linked, about what lies beyond the age of fire, about whether what comes next might be something other than darkness. She does not advocate, she questions. And when the final boss falls and you stand at the bonfire with the chance to choose an ending, if you have given her the eyes and not cured the dark sigil, you can summon her, a blind woman who has been given vision she was never meant to have, and let her help you choose an ending that no keeper before her ever chose for anyone. The Hands of the Soul of Cinder show multiple playstyles. The Soul of Cinder, the final boss of Dark Souls 3's main game, a towering amalgamation of everyone who ever linked the first flame, cycles through different fighting styles during the encounter. It uses sorcery, pyromancy, miracles, and multiple distinct sword stances in sequence, switching between them mid-fight, as if sampling from an enormous library of techniques. This is not random variety. The Soul of Cinder contains, within itself, every build and every approach to combat that a player has ever brought to the final bonfire across all of the game's cycles. It is made of other players, made of choices, of deaths, of experimentation. When it uses a specific stance that echoes Gwyn's sword art from the original game, the identification is unmistakable. Gwyn is in there, the first and most famous person who ever linked the fire. Everything that followed him is in there too. Ludlith was the smallest and most willing. Of the 5 Lords of Cinder whose thrones wait in Firelink Shrine, the Abyss Watchers, Yorm the Giant, Aldrich, the Twin Princes, and Ludlith himself. Ludlith of Corland is the only one who linked the fire entirely by choice, without being coerced, manipulated, or eventually compelled. He is also the physically smallest figure in that group, a tiny, charred, diminished man sitting on a throne proportioned for someone much larger. His item descriptions note that he burned himself to link the flame without hesitation, as an act of personal will, and that he has been sitting on his throne ever since, in a state he describes as perfectly acceptable. He found his purpose. The other lords fled their thrones or were placed on them by circumstance or coercion. Ludlith simply sat down and stayed. In a game about the cost of duty, he is the one who paid it without being asked. The twin princes were never going to agree. Princes Lothric and Lorien, the final boss fight within the Grand Archives, represent the fracture at the heart of Lothric's crisis. Their soul description states that a curse makes their souls nearly inseparable, and that Lothric quietly usurped the fire from his brother. Lorien, the elder, bore a crippling curse that left him unable to walk or speak. Lothric, despite being the weaker and frailer of the two, and the one chosen to link the fire, used his power to take the curse into himself alongside his brother, binding their souls as a consequence. And yet, Lothric still refused his duty. He looked at what linking the fire would mean. The sacrifice, the burning, the continuation of a cycle he did not believe in, and said no. Lorien, devoted to his younger brother, followed that refusal alongside him. The two of them are draped across each other at the start of the boss fight, one who cannot walk, carried by one who will not move. They chose defiance over duty together. Emma spent her life preparing one of them for a different choice, and neither ever made it. The Abyss Watchers fight each other because of corruption. The Abyss Watchers, the Lords of Cinder guarding the entrance to the catacombs of Karthus, are legendary for the chaos of their boss fight. Multiple Watchers active at once, some hostile to you, some hostile to each other, fighting in the same arena with no clear alignment. The reason lies in the lore. All of the Abyss Watchers drank from the same wolf blood, and their soul description states plainly that their souls are one with the soul of the wolf blood master. They shared their soul to forge something strong enough to link the fire. But when the Watchers were eventually awakened again, some of them had been corrupted by the very abyss they swore to destroy, identifiable in the fight by their glowing red eyes. The red-eyed Watchers attack anything and everything around them, including their uncorrupted brethren. The uncorrupted ones fight back. What you witness entering that boss room is a group of soldiers who dedicated their entire existence to hunting the abyss, now being consumed by it from within, turning on each other at the end of everything, in the ruins of the keep they once protected. The old wolf of Farron cannot die. The old wolf of Farron who presides over the Watchdog's covenant can technically be attacked. He has a health bar, but attacking him produces no real result. He regenerates his health almost instantly, and no weapon seems capable of reducing him to zero. He is, in practice, unkillable. This is consistent with the framing of his role. The wolf exists as the embodiment of the Abyss Watcher's covenant, the ancient spirit of the undead legion. He is less a creature than a function, the mechanism through which the covenant persists. Killing the Abyss Watchers does not kill the wolf. Draining the swamp does not remove the wolf. He remains on his pedestal in the ruins of Farron Keep, sleeping, immune, waiting for offerings that the covenant tradition says must be made. The world can end around him and he will still be there, guarding the memory of warriors who no longer need guarding. Orbek's 4 scrolls connect 4 different civilizations. The 4 sorcery scrolls that Orbek asks you to find and bring him represent 4 distinct lineages of magical knowledge in the Dark Souls universe. Logan's scroll, connected to the legendary sorcerer Big Hat Logan, comes from the intellectual tradition of Vinheim's Dragon School. The Sage's scroll connects to the Crystal Sages and their offshoot tradition. The Golden Scroll carries knowledge from the Lothric scholars and their library tradition. The Farron Scroll holds sorceries from within the Abyss Watcher's own practices, war magic developed by soldiers, not scholars. Orbek receives each one and reacts with genuine wonder, recognizing names and lineages, tracing connections he never had access to before. He is not just collecting spells. He's conducting, in the middle of the world's last cycle, the most thorough survey of sorcerous tradition that any single undead scholar has ever attempted. He dies in the archives, having done more for that tradition than anyone since Logan. The final bonfire choice has always been yours. When you stand at the kiln of the first flame after defeating the soul of Cinder, the bonfire burning before you represents the oldest, most contested question in the Dark Souls series. Do you link the flame and continue the Age of Fire, or do you let it fade? Multiple endings are available depending on what you've done throughout the game. Whether you've given the Firekeeper the eyes, whether you've completed the Usurpation of Fire questline, whether you've drawn out your true strength through Yol and carried the Dark Sigil all this way. The NPCs who guided you here have each been trying to influence that choice. Emma prepared Lothric for it and was refused. Yuria orchestrated the entire Lord of Hollows path toward it. The Firekeeper, with her new sight, stands beside it and waits, and every NPC who died along the way, every Greyrut, every Sigurd, every Henri, has fed into the world that arrives at this single moment of decision. The game began with a choice someone else made. It ends with yours. The Witch of Izalith's legacy lives in Cornyx. Cornyx of the Great Swamp teaches pyromancy that traces its lineage back to the original flame of the Witch of Izalith, the flame that the witch attempted to recreate the first flame with, and which instead produced the Chaos Fire and birthed demons. Pyromancy in the Dark Souls universe is not merely a spell school. It is the cultural inheritance of a catastrophe, passed down through generations of swamp-dwelling fire-wielders who preserved the art after everything else about that tradition was consumed. Cornyx carries that inheritance with him into a cage in the undead settlement and waits for someone to let him out. He is cheerful about this, which says something about the durability of the great swamp tradition. Disaster after disaster, the fire goes on. Gwyndolin's presence is felt in Anor, Londo long after death. When you enter Anor Londo in Dark Souls 3, through the rotating tower and the golden lift, the visual presentation of the city still carries the imprint of Gwyndolin's old illusion from the first game. The orange warmth of the city, the sunlit facades, the sense of divine splendor, these were all maintained by Gwyndolin's power in the first Dark Souls, and the echo of that presentation persists in the third game even though Gwendolyn has been consumed by Aldrich long before you arrive. The illusion has faded but not entirely died. Yoshka, up in her invisible tower, still refers to Gwendolyn as if he might return. The Blades of the Darkmoon Covenant still functions in his name. The architecture of the city still reaches upward. Gwendolyn shaped Anor Londo into a testimony of divine presence, and even absent, even eaten, that testimony holds. The Estus Flask is the Firekeeper's gift, not the game's. The Estus Flask, the healing item that every player carries from the first moments of the game, is described in its item lore as something created and maintained by Firekeepers specifically. The flask is filled from the bonfire's essence, but the capacity to hold that essence, the warmth it contains, the gradual increase in number and potency as you find Estus shards. All of this flows through the Firekeeper's service. When you sit at the bonfire and she levels you up, when you allot your Estus to flasks, or Ashen Estus, you are distributing a gift that has a human source. She gives it to you not because the system requires her to, but because her entire existence is the act of giving it. Every sip from that flask in a difficult fight is, in some way, her hand extended from a distance. The covetous gold serpent ring was in Sigurd's cell. When you rescue Sigurd of Katarina from his prison cell in the profaned capital, careful players who loot every corner of that cell will find a corpse holding the covetous gold serpent ring. One of the best item discovery rings in the game. The presence of that ring in a prison cell beside a captured knight raises a question the game never answers. Who was the original prisoner? The cell was occupied before Sigurd fell into it. Someone else was there first, wearing a ring built around the symbol of a serpent's hunger for gold. In a dungeon that held countless people across the long history of the profaned capital, that ring and the body it was worn on are the only evidence that this specific cell had a history before the round man in onion armor arrived with his Estus soup and his sword. The crow that carries you has always been there. At the very beginning of Dark Souls 3, before the game truly starts, before the first bonfire, before Udex Gunda, You begin the game being carried through the air by a giant crow. The crow drops you into the cemetery of ash and disappears. It says nothing. It gives no context. And most players assume it is simply a mechanical introduction, a visual delivery system for the Ashen One's arrival. But in the context of the series, the large crow that transports unkindled from their resting places to Lothric is likely connected to the same magical tradition as the crow in Firelink Shrine's rafters, the nesting crow of the original Dark Souls that once carried the chosen undead back to the undead asylum. These are not random birds. They are something ancient and purposeful, and each one that carries an unkindled to a new beginning is participating in a tradition that predates the current Age of Fire by a very long time. Okeros was once king of Lothric. Okeros, the Consumed King, the writhing dragon-obsessed boss you fight in the Consumed King's garden below Lothric Castle, was, before his transformation, the actual king of Lothric. He was father to Lorien and Lothric, the twin princes whose refusal to link the fire drives the game's entire premise. Over time, Okeros became obsessed with Seat the Scaleless, and the scholars of the Grand Archives introduced him to twisted dragonhood lore. His soul description confirms he went mad trying to harness his royal blood for a greater purpose. He transformed himself into a pale, scaleless creature, and, believing a true dragon descendant would make a worthy lord of Cinder, fathered a third child, Ocelot, whom he called Child of Dragons. By the time you fight him, he is no longer recognizable as the figure who once sat on a throne and ruled a kingdom. His boss room is the threshold to the untended graves, to the dark twin of Firelink Shrine. The family tree of Lothric, traced carefully, is a map of every kind of ruin. A father who became a beast, princes who refused their duty, and a priestess who tried to hold the institution together through faith alone. The High Wall of Lothric looks like a place between. When you first emerge from the Cemetery of Ash and reach the High Wall of Lothric, the first proper area of the game, the visual framing communicates something immediately. You are between worlds. The wall stretches up and away into fog. The towers rise above cloud cover. The city below is partially visible, partially obscured, and the scale of Lothric Castle looming above you is deliberately overwhelming. NPCs in this zone are minimal. The tower on the wall bonfire contains almost no living figures, only the Grerit of the undead settlement locked in his cell, and Leonhard leaning against a throne back in Firelink. The game begins by giving you a world that is almost empty of people, because the people are what you will discover. Every NPC encounter from this point is the game restoring the human element to a world that has been emptied of it, one character at a time. The Warriors of Sunlight Covenant has no Sunlight Warrior. The Warriors of Sunlight Covenant, the same Covenant Solaire of Astora championed in the original Dark Souls, founded on the principle of jolly cooperation and praise for the sun, exists in Dark Souls 3, but its leadership is entirely absent. There is no Solaire, there is no Covenant NPC to speak to, no figure to obtain the Covenant item from. The Sunlight Metal items that serve as offerings are scattered throughout the world, found on corpses and enemies, and the Covenant altar itself is simply a place in Lothric Castle where Sunlight medals can be offered. The Warriors of Sunlight persist as an institution without a founder, guided by the memory of a philosophy rather than a person. The Covenant ring that grants the Covenant can be found near the altar, waiting for whoever picks it up. In a game full of NPCs who shape covenants, this one is defined entirely by an absence, by someone who is not there and whose presence is felt in every metal that bears the sun's image. The Swordmaster's Uchigatana is a message about skill. The Swordmaster outside Firelink Shrine carries the Uchigatana, a weapon with a distinctive moveset that emphasizes precise strikes and bleeds. He is an optional encounter that almost every experienced player kills on their first visit for the early weapon. But within the lore, the Swordmaster's presence at the very threshold of Firelink Shrine, the safest place in the game, sends a clear message about what safety means in Lothric. Even immediately outside the one place designed as a refuge, someone dangerous is waiting. The Uchigatana he carries is a katana tradition item, connected to Vinheim assassin tradition and Eastern weapon styles that have filtered into Lothric from other worlds. He is, in his way, the game's first honest teacher. Here is what a skilled opponent looks like, and here is what you will need to defeat them. Alva's armor tells a love story. Alva, Seeker of the Spurned, an NPC invader who can appear in a small alleyway in Irithil of the Boreal Valley, has an item description that tells a complete narrative through his armor alone. Alva was a knight who sought to heal Saint Sareta, a holy woman afflicted by an incurable illness. He searched for a cure across multiple kingdoms, never finding one, but along the way acquired the name Seeker of the Spurned, not because he was rejected by Sareta, but because the things he sought kept eluding him. The love story in the armor is not explicitly romantic, but its shape is unmistakably devotional. A person who reoriented their entire life around the project of saving one specific other person and kept going long past the point where reason would have said to stop. He invades you silently in Irithil. His backstory is in the seams of his armor. The shrine handmaid becomes the final merchant standing. By the end of the game, after every questline has run its course and every merchant NPC has died, departed, or transformed, the shrine handmaid remains behind her counter in Firelink Shrine. She's been there from the beginning, and she will be there at the end, regardless of what you do. If you bring her the ashes of every fallen merchant, Cornix, Greerat, Orbeck, Karla, everyone, she absorbs their inventories and sells their items as if death was simply another form of stock transfer. She is the last market, the final interface between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and she operates it with the same slightly bored efficiency she had when you first arrived. She is not a survivor in any dramatic sense. She is simply someone who was always there, who will still be there, as the fire chooses whatever it chooses. Horus's Llewellyn shield is the only evidence of his order. When you find Horus, the Hushed, in his hollowed state in the cave at the smouldering lake and defeat him, he drops the Llewellyn shield. Its item description names a specific craftsman, Llewellyn, a legendary unnamed smith, and connects it to the Blue Sentinel's Covenant tradition that Horus was affiliated with while he still had his mind. The shield is one of the few objects in the game that ties Horus to a history before the player ever meets him. An order, a tradition, a craftsman whose reputation extended across enough of the world to be named in item descriptions. Horus never speaks. Henri tells you only fragments, but his shield tells you that once, before the hollowing, he was part of something structured and purposeful, and that whoever made his equipment believed enough in his role to give him something well-crafted and worthy of the name it carries. The Archdragon Peak altar calls to those who seek dragons. At the summit of Archdragon Peak, past the wyverns, past the Nameless King, past the dragons sleeping on the cliff faces, there is a simple altar. Performing the path of the dragon gesture in front of it grants the twinkling dragon torso stone, which allows the player to transform their body partially into a dragon's form. This altar is also where Hawkwood goes. His entire arc, from the crestfallen deserter in Firelink Shrine to the dueling aspirant who challenges you for your dragonstone, ends at this altar. The thing he was moving toward all along. The altar doesn't judge him. It doesn't verify his worthiness. It simply offers the transformation to whoever comes and performs the gesture. In a game full of merit systems and divine tests, the altar at Archdragon Peak is simply waiting, available to anyone willing to make the journey, regardless of what they left behind to get there.